St. Louis Alderman Jack Coatar has only been on the job a few months, but he's about to handle one of the biggest pieces of legislation in the city's recent history. The 7th Ward Alderman joins us next on another edition of Politically Speaking.
9, 8, 7,
6,
5,
4,
3, 2,
1.
I think that is fair
As
to
I
say.
say, hands to kiss and babies to shake. But
I think my record speaks for itself.
That's a really good question.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today is...
colleague co-host Joe Manis.
And our very special guest for today...
Alderman Jack Coatar. How are you guys?
We're doing great. I'm especially glad because we have another Chicago suburban native in the studio and we can outnumber Joe.
Yeah, not somebody from Webster Groves.
That's right.
It's an amazing feat, and I guess we'll know more about that in about 2 minutes when Joe asks where you went to high school. But before we
Yes.
do that, because we always like to do this when we have aldermen on the show, just kind of explain to our listeners what is the boundaries of the 7th Ward, which neighborhoods it includes, and just more a bit about the area of St. Louis that you represent.
Certainly. So the 7th Ward, it consists of downtown St. Louis, so basically from Biddle and the riverfront, everything downtown east of Tucker, and then it heads south along the riverfront, all the way down through Soulard and Kosciuszko, covering pretty much all of Soulard, the industrial part of the riverfront, to Sydney Street on the south, and then Lafayette Square, McKinley Heights, and portions of Fox Park and Compton Heights. So it is geographically the second largest ward in the city.
I was going to say, but in years past, I guess the population center would have probably been like Soulard, Fox Park, Lafayette Square. I'm not sure if the inhabited part of downtown is in your ward or is in Tamika Hubbard's ward, but I'm sure that has more in your ward than in years past.
So I have pretty much the downtown central business district.
Okay.
So most of the Loft district downtown on Washington Avenue is to the west of Tucker Boulevard, and that is not in the 7th Ward. But I do. So I would say yes. So Soulard is the bulk of the residents of the 7th Ward.
Yeah, and at one point, this goes back a few decades, the 6th Ward covered some of the was part of the downtown. The 7th was more Soulard and around there. So your district takes in some of the most influential real estate.
You mean his ward?
Yes.
We're not state legislators here.
Yes, his
Ward, district, whatever.
His ward, whatever.
Yeah.
But it takes in some of the more influential territory. I mean, downtown. Even a lot of the business leaders who don't live downtown, they wield a lot of muscle downtown.
That's correct. They certainly do.
And then, of course, Lafayette Square and the Soulard, which has always been a hopping area. So I'm interested, do you feel like you're dealing with two constituencies, those who live within the city and those who work in the city but live outside but who try to influence city policy?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, I deal with your day-to-day general constituent service problems, trash, potholes, everything that folks in Soulard, Lafayette Square, LaSalle Park, McKinley Heights complain about, and rightfully so. And so that's a big part of my job. But then, I could spend the second half of my day dealing with the head of Stiefel and issues that they have with infrastructure downtown, or the Cardinals, or the Blues, or the Rams, who are all located in the 7th Ward. So, yeah, I basically have, two big constituencies, your residents and your business community downtown.
So, hence, I'm glad you mentioned the Rams. We'll be talking a lot more about that in the next few minutes.
In a few minutes.
But just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to St. Louis, why you decided to run for office. I guess it was earlier this year, actually.
I covered that race. I actually still have the audio of a couple of your forums that you did.
Yeah, so I got elected in the primary in March of this year, and then ran unopposed in the general in April. And it was my first foray into running for political office. Prior to that, I had worked on a lot of political campaigns in Missouri and in the city of St. Louis. But this was the first time I was on the other side that I was actually a candidate for office.
But where are you from?
Oh, so I can't answer the where did you go to high school question. I could. I did go to high school. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago in a town called Olympia Fields, Illinois, not known for much other than a golf course. I went to Marian Catholic, which is a school in the south suburbs, a Catholic school there. And then actually while I was in high school, my family relocated to suburban Kansas City, and I wound up graduating from Blue Valley West, which is in Overland Park, Kansas.
Now, I got to ask this question because I am also a Chicago suburban transplant to St. Louis. When people like Joe or anybody else ask you where you went to high school, What's kind of your reaction to that? Because I have my own reaction to that. My reaction is I went to a high school with 4,500 people, and it's bigger than any school in Missouri, and I'm awesome. But continue.
I mean, I always just sort of see it as a socioeconomic question. They're trying to basically figure out what part of town you're from, what kind of family you grew up in, and I don't know, because frankly, I'm still trying to learn all the high schools in this town.
Well, it's not just, I mean, now, just so our listeners know, I'm from Indiana. I grew up in a high school where I only had 161 in my graduating class. So, I mean, the reason I ask it is because since I've been here off and on for 40 years almost, I'm fascinated by St. Louis's obsession with high school, because it's not just socioeconomical. It's also, they're trying to get a sense of politically where you're coming from, just all sorts of things, because St. Louis, it's not just public school, it's private school, parochial schools, I mean, the whole thing. So I'm sure the fact that you went to a Catholic high school, when you mentioned that, I thought, oh, well, then he's got an in with some of the
I was going to
Catholic
say, because
powers.
after that you went to undergrad at SLU and law school at
I
SLU.
did. That's what brought me to St. Louis. I moved here to go to SLU in 2004 and never left.
Yeah, and so before you were elected, I think you mentioned a number of campaigns, but you were also the executive director of the the St. Louis Democratic Central Committee. Is that correct?
Correct. I was the first and only executive director of the St. Louis
So I
Democratic
have to
Central
ask-
Committee.
What was that about?
It was at a time where we were done with the '08 campaign, which obviously had mobilized a lot of people. There was a ton of energy in St. Louis, to sort of get people involved. We had all these volunteers and all this manpower, and folks wanted to step up and help the Democratic Party. I was an organizer on that '08 campaign and had a lot of relationships throughout the city, and then transitioned from there into running the mayor's field campaign for his '09 reelection. And after that, I was starting law school, and the Central Committee had some big ideas. And I just said, hey, I'll help you guys. I'll help fundraise and pay my salary, and we can get some things done.
What I was going to say was, I don't know how many people who listen to this show follow the politics of like the committee level politics in St. Louis, but it is probably even more fractious and divided than the Board of Aldermen. And I mean, how was it herding all of those cats, essentially?
It was certainly a learning experience for someone who was pretty idealistic and fresh off the Obama campaign. To see politics on that most local level was interesting. I think it has given me insight into both St. Louis politics, and also has helped me at the board, because doing that job, I was and I got to meet a lot of the people who are now my colleagues and their various committee people.
Like Beth Murphy, for example.
Correct, Beth Murphy, Carol Howard. Chris Carter used to be on the Central Committee. I'm trying to think. There's probably some others.
Well, there probably will be others in the future,
Right.
because a committeeman is usually a stepping stone for aldermen.
So what prompted you then to run for alderman? I mean, St. Louis alderman's kind of an unusual animal of its own, which I'll get into later, but what prompted you to run for alderman after doing all this political stuff?
Right. So actually, I was sitting around in the courthouse in St. Louis City. I was a prosecutor for Jennifer Joyce,
Yes.
working in her office. And Phyllis Young is a friend of mine, my predecessor, and we had talked last time that she was thinking about retiring. She'd been in office 29 years, and she called me out of the blue one day and said, I think I'm ready to call it quits. So I was sitting in court and started thinking, oh gosh, should I do this? I always made fun of my friends who quit their jobs when they don't really have another job lined up. And then I found myself in that exact situation. I decided to leave my job in the prosecutor's office and dive headfirst into a run for alderman.
Now, it was a three-way primary. It was between Samuel Cummings, is that his name?
Yes, Samuel Cummings.
And Chelsea Murta.
Yes.
And it was interesting because you raised like $50,000 or $60,000 for that race. I'm just curious, as somebody who follows aldermanic races, did you like buy a talking mailer for every person in the 7th ward? Like, why would you need to raise that amount of money for an aldermanic race?
Having a background in campaigns,
Yeah.
the hardest part about raising money is simply asking for it. So that I was able to do that successfully. It was actually more than 60 that I raised, and I didn't spend all of it. But that was something that I made a decision. If I'm going to run for political office, I'm going to do it right. And one of the things that you got to do to be a strong candidate is be a strong fundraiser. So I came out of the gate and raised a lot of money. So I was able to spend a month and a half of my campaign knocking doors, talking to voters, and not have to worry about financing the campaign.
And by the way, that talking mailer mention is an homage to Russ Carnahan's 2012 campaign.
Yeah, but we won't go there.
I think I spent wisely. There were no talking mailers.
Understood. So continue.
But a lot of issues that were brought up during that campaign are still major issues within the city now, and among them is crime, city budget, how it spends its money, how it's going to get money. Now that you're on the board of aldermen, what, just so our listeners know, what committees are you on, and what issues have you had to confront since you've been on, which is less than a year?
Yeah. So I serve on quite a few committees, most notably public safety and housing, urban development, and zoning. And then I'm also on the conventions and tourism committee, the public utilities committee, and the streets committee.
Those are a lot of committees.
It's a lot of committees.
Yeah, so you touch on a lot of the issues.
Yeah, pretty much. More committees than I asked for, but it's been interesting.
So what are the biggest challenges right now?
I mean, look, the number one issue I hear about is crime. Crime is absolutely the number one concern. And, I'm fortunate representing Soulard, downtown Lafayette Square. We don't have a tremendous amount of violent crime. When we do, it's obviously magnified. It gets a lot of attention.
Yes.
But we have a lot of, smaller crime. We have a lot of car break-ins. We got a lot of burglaries. We have robberies because, frankly, we have very walkable neighborhoods where there's a lot of people out and about, even in the evenings. So that's the number one issue I hear about. The second biggest issue I hear about is just simply infrastructure. The roads, the crumbling roads, the sidewalks that are in terrible shape. People want to see more spending on those kinds of things in the city.
Now, looking at it from a broader perspective, in the late 70s, okay, the city had crime, but it wasn't as highlighted. In the early 80s, without getting into specifics, there was a lot of marquee murders in the city in the 80s. Some of them involving mob hits, some of it involving stuff happening, just random stuff in people's homes. I had a couple of personal friends who were murdered. So it seemed like the 80s was kind of a hot period. Then things sort of slowed down crime-wise for about 20 years. I mean, not that you didn't have it and stuff, but it wasn't as all-consuming as it seems to have become again the last year or two. Why do you think that is, and what do you think the city needs to do to confront it?
Well, one of the reasons I think is just simply now with all the various platforms we have, and I'm not going to just say it's the media's fault that they're reporting on it more. We all have more access to more information. I mean, you can open up Nextdoor, which is a popular app in the neighborhoods I represent, and I think everywhere in the city. Get on Twitter, get on Facebook anytime, and you can always hear a story about someone's car that got broken into or somebody who got, mugged or whatever else. And so it's just sort of all around us all the time. And when in reality, between this year and last year, actually, in many of the neighborhoods that I represent, crime's actually down. While the murder rate in the city is rising, and there's been a lot more aggravated assaults citywide, in many neighborhoods, certain areas of crime, the indicators like robberies and burglaries and things, crime's actually on the downswing.
I always ask this when we have aldermen on, but what is kind of your feeling of how Police Chief Sam Dotson is doing in his job, and also how the mayor is doing as far as crime prevention is going? Because now with local control, he is basically in charge of the police department and crime fighting strategy.
Right. Given local control now, there's nowhere to pass the buck. You don't have a board of police commissioners anymore, and so ultimately the buck does stop with the mayor and with the police chief. And I've got a great working relationship with both of them. I've told Sam, and I think he probably knows this by now. I think these districts need to be looked at. People. He's gotten a lot of criticism from some of the aldermen, myself included, about the configuration of the new districts and how resources are allocated. And I think that's something that seriously needs to be revisited in the near future, because the districts are too big and you're spreading resources too thin.
Do they need more police on the streets, or does it need to be maybe different techniques? I'm just interested.
Probably both. I mean, the one thing Sam has said consistently from the very beginning is he needs more officers. And so unfortunately, the presentation we got, or the bills that were presented to us to vote for more police, unfortunately were funded through funding sources that we didn't even know if we'd have. They were unsure because they were red light
cameras, which you don't have right now.
Right, and the other funding sources would have required a bunch of votes on various taxes and fee increases, which I think, frankly, we could have passed had those made it to the ballot. But Sam says he needs more cops. I think we've got to find a way to get him more cops. But what we also have to do is we've got to get serious and figure out we got to pay these guys more. Police officers, the day they start in the city of St. Louis, make $9,000 less than their counterpart in St. Louis County, and it's a lot more dangerous job here in the city. And that pay disparity continues over time, and that's why we wind up losing so many talented police officers that have made it through the academy, spent a few years in some of our more rough and tumble police districts, gotten a wide range of experience, and then they can leave for greener pastures elsewhere.
Now, before you were sworn in, there was a vote to establish a citizens review committee or commission of the police department. Now, there have been some people who've said it's like a good first step because this is something that's been pushed for years by Alderman Terry Kennedy, for example. But there have been some on both sides of the spectrum who are like, this doesn't have subpoena power. This is not going to be that practically useful to rooting out potential problems among the police. And now, I know that you didn't have a vote on that, but what is kind of your expectations for that going forward?
No, and I didn't have a vote on the Civilian Oversight Board, but I did have a vote on the various nominees that we just appointed to the board and sat through most of those committee hearings. I think we got to at least give the thing a chance. I know there's a lot of people unhappy that it doesn't have subpoena power, but frankly, most boards and commissions don't have subpoena power. Very few people do have subpoena power. So why don't we give the thing a chance and see if it actually works without it before we immediately say that this thing's useless before it's even had a chance to get off the ground.
The crime problem is connected, as is this other issue we're going to be hitting on in a few minutes, the state of the city's budget.
Yeah.
Where the city gets its money, where it needs to get money. There's whole red light camera thing has affected it. What do you see as the financial issues right now, and how is the city going to confront them?
Well, we have a lot of financial issues, and as I mentioned earlier, the infrastructure needs of the city. I mean, that list is growing by the day, and we didn't pass the general obligation bond in the August ballot, which I think was very problematic. I mean, we've got bridges that are literally crumbling, roads that are crumbling. We can't even come up with the matching funds to go get money from the federal government to fix some of these projects because our budget's in such dire straits. And those are things that I don't have a quick solution because the city, I mean, in terms of departments and employees, at least the ones under the control of, Room 200, I think they're running pretty thin, but ultimately, we've got to find money to do the big things, to pay for the infrastructure improvements first and foremost. I mean, I don't know how you expect people to come downtown and spend money or drive into the city and park and have a good time here if the infrastructure is not there to support them. And right now, I don't think it is.
And this leads right into
the stadium. Dun, 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 dun. See, that's a much better introduction to this. So, what I've been covering the melee over this new Riverfront Stadium since January. I don't think I've been covering it day to day like David Hunt of the Post-Dispatch. He's done an excellent job of that. But there's a lot to unpack here. I think number one is the psychological impact it would be if St. Louis lost an NFL team for the second time because the St. Louis Cardinals moved to Phoenix and then to the suburbs of Phoenix. And then just the mechanics of whether the owners are going to vote for the Rams to move and whether the stadium financing comes into place. We'll get into that in a minute, but I want to, at a very basic level, as somebody who is sponsoring the bill that will provide the city's portion of this $1 billion stadium that's funded both with private and public dollars, why do you think this is necessary right now for St. Louis?
I mean, I think this is necessary right now because if we don't take this chance, if we don't at least pass this bill and do our part to try to keep our NFL team, we're going to lose our football team, and we're going to miss out on a chance to basically spend 15% of $1 billion construction project to revitalize an area of the riverfront that up to this point has seen no private investment. And there's no indications that if we don't do this, that anyone else is going to step up and pay to move the railroad tracks and fix this blighted area.
Well, is there a discussion at all about the financial impact? I mean, Jason's written about it. Others have too, about the financial impact if the Rams go as far as what the city gets from sales tax and other stuff. Is that figuring into this argument or not?
Yes, it most certainly is. And I will say this, the task force and even the mayor's office up to this point, I don't think they've done a very good job of explaining that to the general public. And so this Thursday, actually our first committee hearing, I don't know when this airs.
It will air before Thursday.
Okay, good. So this Thursday at 9 a.m. in City Hall, the city's budget gurus will be there to explain the financial impact of this project.
And I haven't crunched the numbers 100%. I have talked to the statistician that is employed by the mayor. And there was an article in the St. Louis Business Journal about how, after all is said and done, after conservative estimates, it would cost like $1 million. My question is, and this is kind of maybe a question that maybe won't make the anti-stadium folks happy, but is that really the goal, to build a stadium that ends up making money or breaks even? Or is it worth the city and city taxpayers and state taxpayers spending some money so this cultural asset is there? And I know that people think of cultural assets as like concerts and music, but everyday people love the Rams. So is it worth it to spend some money here?
I think so. People love the Rams. People love football. You know, if the project breaks even, I think that's a win for us. I think to spend 15% of this project and get a brand new stadium and keep our football team, if we can get that done, I think that's a win for us. And I mean, what all the numbers that you'll see on Thursday and that the statisticians have crunched, what they don't factor in is that sense of pride. And that's a legitimate argument. We want to keep a football team, and what does it do to our city if we really lose a second football team in 25 years?
But even if the city puts together a great proposal, and Jason's written about this too, chances are Stan Kroenke wants to be on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And no matter what, I mean, the city arguably could give him something wrapped up in a beautiful bow, and he may say, no, I want to be in California. So I know they talk about making St. Louis attractive for an expansion team, but has there been any thoughts about how you'd go about that? I mean, 20 years ago, I covered when the Rams was here. We were supposed to get at one point an expansion team. This is before the Rams, right before.
The St. Louis Stallions.
Yes, and ended up going to Jacksonville. And I'm just interested in how you're going to deal with what may very well be a reality of Kroenke leaving no matter what you do.
Right. And actually, I touched on this in an interview I did with Jason, I think last week, in his story. You know, the part of that is beyond my control. What the NFL owners decide to do, what a bunch of billionaires decide to do, I can't control at this point. What we can control is, let's do our part. Let's pass the bill and show that we've got a viable plan. And remember, none of this happens without $250 million from the NFL owner and an additional $200 million matching from the NFL. So they're in for at least $450 to make this project work. And so that doesn't get done unless you've got a commitment from the league that you either have the Rams with Stan Kroenke, have the Rams without Stan Kroenke, or have some other football team.
Now, obviously, funding stadiums through public money is always controversial. It's controversial in every city that it's done. And I guess even in the situation with Kroenke Stadium, which is not actually publicly funded that much, there's still some controversies involved with, still getting tax breaks and whatnot. But I do want to touch on the fact that there was a city ordinance until a couple of months ago that required a vote before there's any stadium funding. I'm going to play a clip now from St. Louis County Executive Steve Stanger, who has been pretty adamant on the fact that while he's not against the county contributing, it needs to have a public vote attached before any money goes out. Here's what he had to say.
And the state of the law in the county is different than the state of the law in the city. The state of the law in the county is that we have a charter amendment, and that's the law. That's the charter. That has to be respected. And I think the vote of the people, as a principled matter, has to be respected. And I think that if we're going to move forward, it needs to be with a vote of the people.
Now, I understand you're not the mayor of St. Louis, and I know that he's kind of driving this train here, but it's pretty clear that St. Louis Mayor Francis Slade did not take that mentality. He often said the fact, like, we'll just see what the law is, and we'll see what the courts do. He didn't take the mentality that, even if this law gets struck down, we should still have a vote anyway because it's the right thing to do. And I think that there's a lot of people within the Board of Aldermen who still hold to that view. What do you kind of make of that sort of tension that's there, that this isn't being put up to a vote?
Yeah. So I guess if you had asked me, earlier this year, should there be a public vote, knowing very little about what we would have been voting on, I probably would have said yes. But then, a judge, I think rightfully so, said, look, you can't have public votes deciding who gets what state incentive packages and, CDDs and TDDs and all these various taxing instruments. Those are creatures of state law. The public in this city doesn't get to add extra rules for participating in those programs, and rightfully, I think, threw the statute out. Now, if the backers that really want a public vote were serious about this effort, they should have introduced this bill 2 months ago.
And you're
when the
referring
judges
to
validated it.
another bill from Alderwoman Megan Green, who is, I think, putting stadium funding in this situation connected to a public vote.
Right.
Continue.
Right. And at the end of the day, the people of the 7th Ward elected me to have to go down to City Hall every day and make hard choices. This is a representative democracy. A bunch of folks voted for me. I have to go down there and call it as it is, try to make the right call, vote for it or vote against it, but always make a decision and be able to explain that to people. So that's what I'm going to do.
But from a practical standpoint, and this is more on the task force and Nixon rather than even the mayor or any alderman. It seems if they had not been so hostile to public votes in the city and the county, and they would have said, yeah, let's have public votes in the county and the city. We'll have it for November. We'll make sure we make a great case. And they both passed. It seems like St. Louis would be in a lot stronger position right now. Would you say that's fair to say?
I agree. And you know what? I think we could have passed it with a public vote had we sold it the right way. But you know what? I would hope after seeing the bond issue, which we desperately need, the general obligation bond, not pass with the margins that it needed in August, and the kind of lackluster sales effort that went into that, I wonder if we actually could have passed this in the city and the county. I'm optimistic maybe we could have, but I don't know.
Now, how much discussion is there really with the state? And, of course, the governor has his commission and everything, but there's a lot of hostility in the General Assembly. And this reminds me a lot of 2004 when you had Catherine Henaway, who's now running for governor. Some say that she lost for Secretary of State because she was hammered on the fact that she had voted at one point for what were seen as incentives or encouragement on the state level for the Cardinals. So my point being that helping team owners seems to be a non-starter among the public in rural Missouri, or at least that's how politicians perceive it. So when you're dealing with the state, what sort of discussions are being held that are constructive?
I'd have to defer to you guys. You're the experts on Jeff City, not me. I hear that certain legislators in Jeff City are making threats about tanking the state's credit rating or killing this deal, and I have no idea if that'll actually
I'm
happen.
glad that you mentioned that because then thank you, Joe, for this is a really good segue. I actually have a clip from Senator Rob Schaaf of St. Joseph, who has been one of the more persistent state critics of this. And it should be clear here, there's kind of two tracks here. We're dealing with the city funding with the alderman here, but there's also a major state component of funding that is arguably more significant. It's not arguably. There's more state money that's going into the city.
Almost twice as much money.
And the tension there is a little bit different. Like, the Board of Aldermen is going to vote on this. Like, the individual members are going to have to vote. You're going to need 15 votes. They're going to have to.
Assuming we get the bill out of committee, I would expect there'll be a vote at some point. Yeah.
So in the state, it's looking like there's not going to be a legislative vote or a statewide vote to issue these bonds. And it's caused a lot of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to get pretty upset over this. The most upset may be Senator Schaaf. Here's what he had to say last week.
If they can figure out a way to get suckers to buy the bonds, they will build that stadium. They will. And they will have played chicken with us. And I'm telling you, I don't care if it hurts our credit rating. I'm not going to have them play chicken and win. I'm going to win at chicken because I really don't care about the bond rating as opposed to the pocketbooks of the people of Missouri.
Now, again, I know that you're not the expert on the state aspect here. You're more of the city person. But I asked Dave Peacock if the lawmakers like Schaaf block the state payments on the bonds that are issued, whether that's going to be a threat to the stadium. And he signaled that it could be, and he didn't think it would happen because they thought that the credit rating piece would be a disincentive. But as you just heard, for some, it's not a disincentive at all. So how is that going to affect the deliberations on the city portion, knowing that some legislators are very upset about the state portion of it?
Well, I don't think I'm going to let a legislator from St. Joe really influence the decision that I'm going to make for the people of the 7th Ward in the city of St. Louis.
Take that, St. Joe.
Yeah, take that, St. Joe. I do think it's pretty terrifying that that Mr. Schaaf said that he's willing to risk the credit rating of the state of Missouri just to prove a political point. I think that's really a dangerous proposition.
Now, as far as this, let's shift back to the city part, because although that was entertaining, that's not really your purview. So as we're getting, I'm going to generalize it a little bit here, but as far as the city's portion of it, basically the city is going to issue $70 million worth of bonds, which will be paid off, I think, on a 35-year period. The total cost when it's all said and done, I think, is a little over $200 million or so, but that's also taking into account that the money that is like $9 million now in 2052 is probably going to be worth $4 million now. So saying it's $30 or $200 million over a 30-year period, it's not as alarming as it may seem. The thing is, though, a percentage of the game day taxes, I think almost 2/3 is going to go to the owner to recoup for the naming rights, which will be bonded, and that will be used as collateral as well. And this also includes some non-stadium events. So, for example, someone brought this up, and I thought it was a funny example. If the Rolling Stones play their 75th anniversary in this new stadium, they're 105 years old, which would be quite a sight. A lot of the
They may not look much different than some of them do now.
A lot of the taxes for that would go to Kroenke or the NFL owners. Is that going to be a sticking point in this discussion, that even the non-NFL events are going to go to pay for this stadium or go to pay the NFL owner?
Well, that is true. A portion of the taxes from this new facility, even for non-NFL events, would go to the team ownership. And the sales tax, I believe half of that would go towards a team ownership, and certain other amusement taxes, 100% of that would go towards a team. Doesn't include MLS. If we were able to get a soccer team, that wouldn't be included in the deal. And ultimately, I look at it like this. If we aren't able to build a stadium and keep our football team, we won't have this facility for the Rolling Stones to play their 75th anniversary concert in. If we do build it, we'll keep a portion of the tax.
Well, one of the things that gets me in all this is because, about the bonds, it's like over 30 years or 35 or whatever. Okay, you're looking at the current stadium. As I said, I covered when they originally were building that and getting the team. At that point, it was considered state of the art. It was going to be, around a while, this and that. Here we are 20 years later, and they're talking about how obsolete it is, how, it's not big enough on this, or it's not configured right on that. So when you're talking about financing a new one for 30 years, isn't it more likely that it's going to be the same situation, except maybe in 10 or 15 years? And then what do you do?
I don't know. That is the big question, and that's something I think the whole country has to look at some point is, should we be publicly financing stadiums at all down the road? I mean, we're going to build, hopefully we can get this one built, but you're exactly right. Is it going to be 15 or 25 years before the Rams need another stadium? What about the Cardinals? They've now been in their stadium almost 10 years. When are they going to want a new stadium, a Busch Stadium 3? So at some point, we do have to step back, I think, as a country and say, are we going to keep using tax-exempt bonds, government bonds, for these projects?
So before we even get to a vote where you need 15, you have to get through the Ways and Means Committee, which starts on Thursday. And as I explained, I think a couple of times now, it's not really the friendliest committee that this could be sent to. You have maybe 3 probable yes votes, and then like 5 either undecided or no votes, including Alderman Chris Carter. I'm going to play a clip from him, and then I'll get to my next question.
No one wants to see the Rams leave. I mean, I'm a fan, but at what cost? Is it too much? And I just think that right now, if we would have went to the people, I would have supported either way. We haven't. We are forcing this down the people's throats.
So in addition to Carter, you have also Antonio French, the alderman, who has threatened to filibuster this at every turn if there's not a comprehensive crime plan. You have Sam Moore, who is a co-sponsor of Megan Green's bill, and I've heard him in committee. He's not a huge fan of this idea. You have Scott Ogilvie, who is also on Twitter, not a very huge fan of this. And you also have Terry Kennedy, who I don't think has said anything, but I'm not really putting him as a yes vote because I think to him, crime and crime fighting is more important than stadium building. In my calculation, you need at least 2 of those people to either vote for it, or 3 of those people to not vote, or you need Lewis Reed to come in the event of a tie. So with all this machination, explain for the listener, How are you going to get this through committee exactly?
It's not going to be easy. And that's why we're going to, spend a lot of time trying to explain this deal to people and make them comfortable with the numbers, and hopefully get a lot of input from the public, hopefully more pro than con in support of the deal. But no, I certainly understand the political realities we're facing in the Ways and Means Committee, and many others do as well. This is not going to be an easy vote to get out of committee.
Now, if it gets out of committee, that's a big if, who knows, maybe you could use the same procedure the minimum wage people used to get it out of committee, which would be interesting because I know you were opposed to the minimum wage bill, and I'm sure you weren't very happy when it was brought up to the floor, but that could be the only way to get this out of committee. How do you get 15 votes for that? Because we've heard a lot of people say, like, they're not in favor of stadium funding, but you may have some people like you who are interested in the economic development component. What is kind of your prognosis if it actually gets out of committee?
If we get the bill out of committee, I think we can get to the 15 votes on the floor. I'm confident in that. But first we've got to get the thing out of the Ways and Means Committee, which is not going to be easy.
It's probably going to be one of the more watched publicly committees that we're going to see in quite some time. Like the minimum wage, as I mentioned before, had a lot of public input, but this is a story that has just everyday people paying attention on both sides. You have some very ardent Rams fans who are going to these public meetings, will probably be there on Thursday, who are very passionate about getting the stadium built. And then you have a lot of people who are on the complete opposite side of the spectrum who are very passionate about not spending money for this.
Right.
So what are you kind of expecting as far as the debate goes? We talked about the vote counting, but what are you thinking the debate is going to be?
Oh, I think we're going to have a lively room. We're going to have, obviously, the Rams fans will be there. They showed up in droves for the NFL's public hearing a couple of weeks ago. You're going to have a lot of labor. A lot of folks from the building trades are going to be at these hearings because this is a big, big deal from them, and this project has an opportunity to put a lot of people back to work.
Politically, how influential would the building trades be in either helping to get it through Ways and Means, or, I mean, they obviously would probably be influential in getting it through on a floor vote. I mean, how big of a behind-the-scenes role are they playing right now?
The building trades are playing a pretty big role in this project. This and geospatial are their number 1 and 2 priorities. And so, I mean, I don't know if you don't go to as many Board of Alderman meetings anymore. Jason's there a lot. The building trades have been there the last few weeks talking to members, and they're going to continue doing so.
Well, maybe Jo could come back and relive her bygone era.
You could be my special guest.
Right.
I'm always Donna Behringer's special guest because I am a 16th Ward resident. But thank you very much for coming on the show. We're looking forward to this stadium debate, and I'm sure a lot of people in the St. Louis region and around the country will be following this very closely. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. I'm on Twitter at Jay Rosenbaum. Jo is on Twitter at
Jay Mannies. That's JMANNIES.
And we can follow you on Twitter at
Jay Coatar.
Until next week, so long.
Anyway, this cake is great. It's so delicious.